Daniel and Emily Hopper were the couple everyone admired, until a single weekend turned their perfect life into a horrifying tale of betrayal, greed, and two brutal murders that left their daughter alone in a community forever haunted. The Harpers seemed to have everything. In the small, sunlit town they called home, they were the family everyone pointed to when asked about happiness. Daniel Harper, tall and broad-shouldered, owned a modest but successful construction company. He was known for his firm handshake and easy smile, always ready to help a neighbor fix a fence or repair a leaky roof. Emily, his wife, had an air of quiet elegance, the kind of person who remembered birthdays and baked pies for sick neighbors. She worked as a teacher at the local elementary school, beloved by her students for her patience and warmth. Their only child, Grace, was a bright, cheerful teenager who excelled in school and had a circle of friends who adored her. Their home reflected their life. A white-painted two-story house with a neatly trimmed lawn, flower beds bursting with color, and a porch swing that creaked gently in the evening breeze. Weekends were filled with barbecues, the smell of grilled food drifting through the neighborhood, and the sound of laughter carrying into the night. Christmas lights went up in early December, Easter baskets were delivered to friends, and summer evenings often ended with the Harpers sitting together under the stars, sipping lemonade and talking about the future. To anyone looking in from the outside, it was the perfect picture of stability. But even in the most idyllic of scenes, shadows can creep in unnoticed. Daniel's business, though steady in the public eye, had been struggling quietly. A few projects had cost more than anticipated, and payments from certain clients had been delayed. Daniel never spoke of it openly, keeping the burden to himself, confident he could work through it without worrying his family. Emily, meanwhile, had her own secrets. A misplaced receipt for an expensive restaurant that Daniel had never heard of sat tucked in her wallet. On certain nights she would step outside to take phone calls, her voice low, glancing around as if making sure no one was watching. Grace noticed these moments in passing, but her mind was on school, friends, and the comforting rhythm of family life. Neighbors sometimes thought they saw Daniel's SUV parked in unusual places late at night, but dismissed it as business-related. They noticed Emily seemed more distracted than usual, but attributed it to the pressures of teaching. Ruckus never picked up on the tension. To her, her parents were unshakable. Two people bound by love and the life they had built together. There were signs, subtle and easy to overlook, that all was not as it seemed. Emily had started locking her phone with a password she refused to share. Daniel began working later and later, often returning home with an edge in his voice and an unreadable look in his eyes. Dinner conversations grew shorter, the pauses between them longer. Even their friends noticed fewer invitations to the lively gatherings that had once been a hallmark of the Harpers' social life. Despite these changes, the family maintained the outward image of unity. At church on Sundays, they sat together, Emily's hand resting lightly on Daniel's arm, Grace smiling between them. In public, they were still the family that inspired quiet admiration, the ones whose lives seemed untouched by hardship or discord. Behind closed doors, though, unspoken words and hidden truths were beginning to shape a new reality. Neither Daniel nor Emily could fully see the path they were on, but they both felt the weight of it in their own way. The balance that had defined their lives was shifting, and though neither would admit it, they sensed the ground beneath them beginning to crack. It was a fragile piece, the kind that holds together through routine and habit, until one day something small tips it over the edge. In the Harper household, that moment was coming, swift, unseen and fantastical. The events that would soon unfold would not just shake the foundations of their home, but would leave an entire community questioning how well they truly knew the people they thought they could trust. From the outside, the Harpers were still the smiling family in the White House, with the blooming flowers and the friendly waves. Inside, they were a few quiet steps away from a tragedy that no one, and even those closest to them, could have imagined. And when it came, it would arrive not as a sudden storm, but as the final snap of a rope that had been fraying in silence for far too long. It was a warm Saturday morning, when Grace woke to an unusually quiet house. The hum of the coffee maker, the shuffle of her mother in the kitchen, and the faint sound of her father's radio in the garage, were all missing. At first she thought her parents had gone out early to run errands, something they occasionally did. The cars were gone from the driveway, which didn't alarm her at first. She poured herself a bowl of cereal and settled in front of the television, expecting them to return within the hour. As the minutes turned to hours, unease began to creep in. Emily usually left a note or sent a quick message if they planned to be away for long. Grace checked her phone repeatedly, but there were calls, no texts. By midday she was pacing through the house, opening doors and glancing out the windows. She tried calling both of their phones, only to be met with endless ringing before the calls went to voicemail. By early evening her hands trembled as she dialed the police. Within the hour, officers arrived asking questions and making notes. They began by tracing the Harpers' most recent activity. Bank records showed their credit cards had last been used earlier that morning at a gas station set 8 towns away. CCTV footage from the station captured the Harper SUV pulling in, but the image was grainy, distorted by the glare of sunlight. The person who stepped out to pump gas wore a dark cap pulled low over their face, obscuring any clear identification. The station clerk insisted only one person exited the vehicle. The following day, the SUV was found abandoned on a dirt road near the edge of a dense forest. It was parked at an angle, the driver's side door slightly ajar. Inside, Daniel's jacket lay on the passenger seat. The driver's seat itself was pushed far back, suggesting someone taller than Daniel had been behind the wheel. The glove compartment was empty, and there was no sign of Emily's purse or phone. The search for the missing couple expanded quickly. Police and volunteers combed the wooded area with dogs, moving methodically through the trees and undergrowth. Hours into the search, an officer spotted a piece of fabric snagged on a low branch. It was a scarf, Emily's favorite, recognizable from family photos. It was the only trace of her found in the area. The lack of clear evidence only deepened the mystery. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, and no footprints leading away from the vehicle. The forest floor was littered with leaves, making it difficult to track anyone's movements. Investigators began working through possible scenarios. A robbery seemed unlikely since the SUV was still intact, and nothing of major value appeared to be missing, except for the Harpers themselves. Back in town, neighbors were stunned. Many came forward to offer any information they could, but most admitted they had seen nothing unusual. A few recalled hearing a vehicle pass through the area late the night before, but no one could confirm it was the Harpers' SUV. Others whispered about growing tension between Daniel and Emily, though no one had witnessed any outright arguments. Grace, now staying with a family friend, refused to believe the darker theories that began circulating. She dismissed suggestions that her father might have harmed her mother, and she couldn't accept that they had simply left by Visi. To her, the only explanation was that something terrible had happened to them, something beyond their control. 3 days into the investigation, the case took a grim turn. A jogger, following a trail near a creek several miles from where the SUV was found, stumbled upon a shape partially hidden in the brush. It was Daniel. His hands were bound tightly with rope, and his wallet was gone. The coroner later confirmed he had died from a severe blow to the head. The news spread quickly through the community, shattering the image of the Harper family forever. What had started as a missing persons case was now a homicide investigation. Emily was still missing, her fate uncertain. The cheerful home with the white paint and flower beds now stood empty, its silence a grim reminder of how quickly life can be torn apart. The search for answers had only just begun, and with every passing hour the mystery grew darker. The discovery of Daniel's body marked a turning point in the investigation. The image of the dependable husband and devoted father, the man who had built his life around family and community, was now forever linked to a violent crime scene. News crews gathered outside the police station, reporters speaking in urgent tones about the unfolding tragedy. Neighbors left flowers near the Harper home, though the gesture felt hollow in the face of such brutality. Emily's absence weighed heavily on everyone's mind. She had not been found, and no one knew whether she was alive or dead. The medical examiner's report provided grim details. Daniel's wrists and ankles had been bound with thick rope, the same kind used in construction or boating. There were signs of a struggle, bruising on his arms and cuts on his knuckles, but his injuries suggested he had been overpowered quickly. The blow to his head had been forceful and deliberate. Without a clear timeline, police could only speculate about when exactly he had been killed. Investigators began piecing together Daniel's final days. They started with his business, reviewing contracts, financial statements and correspondence. On the surface, the company appeared to be stable, But deeper examination revealed overdue invoices, unpaid subcontractors, and several lawsuits pending. It painted a picture of a man under immense pressure, struggling to keep his business afloat. Police considered whether these financial troubles might have drawn the attention of dangerous people. Then came the first break. While combing through Daniel's phone records, detectives noticed several unanswered calls from an unknown number in the days before his disappearance. Tracing the number led them to a man named Richard Lall, a figure from Emily's past. Richard had a criminal record for assault and theft, and though his most recent offenses were minor, his history made him a person of interest. Investigators also found that in the week before Daniel's murder, Emily had withdrawn a significant amount of cash from her personal account, nearly all her savings. No one knew what she had done with the money. This raised troubling questions about whether she had been planning to leave Daniel or whether she had been coerced into something she could not escape. The public, hungry for answers, began forming their own theories. Some believed Daniel's death was tied to his failing business, the work of someone he owed money to. Others whispered about an affair, pointing to the reappearance of Richard Cole. Still others suggested Emily had been taken against her will, and the cash withdrawal was part of a ransom arrangement. Police turned their focus to Richard. He was brought in for questioning, maintaining that he had not seen Emily in years. But the story began to unravel when detectives obtained security footage from a roadside motel. The grainy video showed Emily checking into a room with Richard late on the night before she vanished. The next morning, she was seen leaving the room alone, walking quickly toward the parking lot. Richard checked out later that day. Further investigation revealed that Richard had recently purchased rope, duct tape, and gloves from a hardware store. The rope matched the type used to bind Daniel. Confronted with the receipts, Richard admitted he had been in contact with Emily, but claimed their meeting had been about personal matters, unrelated to Daniel. He insisted he had no involvement in the murder. Still, the pieces were beginning to align in a way that pointed toward a deeper conspiracy. Forensic testing on the SUV uncovered faint traces of Richard's fingerprints on the driver's door. This was not enough for a conviction, but it was enough to keep him under constant surveillance. Emily remained missing, and the clock was ticking. Every day without finding her decreased the likelihood she would be found alive. Investigators hoped she might be hiding out of fear, but there was an unshakable letter that she had already met the same fate as her husband. The combination of financial trouble, a mysterious reappearance of an old boyfriend, and a brutal killing painted a picture no one had expected. What began as a story of a happy family was revealing itself to be far more complicated and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The investigation tightened around Richard Cole as more evidence emerged, linking him to the Harpers. Detectives mapped out a timeline, piecing together Emily's last known movements. The motel footage was the most damning clue so far, showing her and Richard together just hours before Daniel's murder. It was a direct contradiction to Richard's initial claim that he hadn't seen her in years. His explanation that their meeting was harmless did little to convince anyone, especially when the hardware store receipt and the matching rope were added to the list of suspicious details. Still, there were gaps in the case. Detectives needed to know why Emily had withdrawn such a large sum of money, and why she had gone to meet a man with a violent history. The theory that Emily and Richard had conspired together began to gain traction. Investigators considered whether Daniel's death was motivated by life insurance, the elimination of debts, or something more personal. When police revisited Emily's financial records, they noticed the withdrawal of her savings wasn't the only unusual activity. 2 weeks before the murder, she had stopped depositing her salary into the couple's joint account. Instead, she had been funneling the money into a separate account in her own name. This pattern suggested preparation for a major change, possibly leaving Daniel. If she had been planning to start a new life, Richard could have been a part of it. A second search of the Harpers' home uncovered more subtle clues. In a box hidden in the back of Emily's closet, detectives found letters tied together with a ribbon. The handwriting was Richard's. Some dated back to her college years, but several were recent, their language intimate, and filled with references to meeting in secret. The most chilling note hinted at getting rid of the problem so they could finally be together. The problem was never named, but investigators had little doubt who it referred to. Richard's phone records showed multiple late-night calls to Emily over the past 2 months. Many of these calls took place when Daniel was known to be working late. suggesting they were being cautious. The frequency of Lennox increased sharply in the days leading up to the murder. The pattern painted a picture of careful planning rather than a spontaneous crime. Confronted with this evidence, Richard changed his story. He admitted that Emily had reached out to him, claiming she was unhappy in her marriage. He said she wanted his help to scare Daniel into agreeing to a separation. According to Richard, the plan was never supposed to involve killing. He claimed Daniel's death had been an accident, a struggle that got out of control. Detectives doubted this version, especially given the methodical nature of the binding and the fatal head injury. In the midst of this, the search for Emily continued. Days turned into weeks, and hope that she might be alive began to fade. Every lead seemed to circle back to Richard, but without finding Emily, there was still a missing piece. Investigators feared that if Richard had indeed killed her after Daniel, the chances of recovering her body diminished with each passing day. Then came a break. A truck driver reported seeing a woman resembling Emily at a rural gas station 2 days after Daniel's body was found. The sighting was in a remote area about 30 miles from town. Surveillance footage confirmed it was Emily, looking tired and disheveled, buying a bottle of water before leaving in a small sedan. The car was traced to a rental company, and the paperwork revealed it had been rented by Richard using a fake ID. This discovery shattered any remaining doubt about Richard's involvement. It proved he had been with Emily after Daniel's death. The question now was whether she had been traveling with him willingly or under duress. Investigators leaned toward the latter, especially when they learned the car had been returned late, smelling strongly of bleach. The focus shifted to rural properties Richard had access to. One in particular, a neglected farmhouse once owned by his uncle, stood out. Located deep in the countryside, it was far from neighbors and rarely visited. Detectives obtained a warrant and began preparing to search it, suspecting it could hold the answer to Emily's fate. The case that had begun with the disappearance of a seemingly happy couple was now revealing itself as a web of betrayal, greed, and calculated violence. And with the farmhouse search looming, the truth was finally within reach. The search of the old farmhouse began at first light. The property was in disrepair, with broken windows, a sagging roof, and weeds that reached nearly to the porch. Inside, dust coated every surface, and the air smelled of mildew and decay. Investigators moved cautiously from room to room, documenting each space. In the kitchen, they found a half-empty water bottle, its expiration date matching the time frame of Emily's last sighting. Nearby, a cigarette butt lay on the floor, and lab testing would later confirm Richard's DNA on the filter. The real discovery came in the back of the house. Behind a warped wooden door, they entered a small windowless room. The floor was stained in places, and in the corner beneath a rotting tarp they found a shallow pit. Inside was the body of Emily Harper. She was still wearing the same clothes seen in the gas station footage. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation. The grim scene confirmed the worst fears of investigators. Emily had survived her husband's murder only to be killed days later. The question of motive became clearer with each new piece of evidence. On a nearby table sat Emily's handbag, containing her phone identification and a crumpled envelope with the remnants of the cash she had withdrawn before Daniel's death. There was also a torn sheet of paper with a list of items: rope, gloves, cleaning supplies, all matching purchases Richard had made in the weeks leading up to the murders. The timeline now painted a chilling picture. Emily had reconnected with Richard months earlier, and their relationship had turned into a conspiracy to kill Daniel. She had promised Richard money from Daniel's life insurance policy, and the freedom to be together without the burden of her marriage. Richard, eager for both the payout and control over the situation, agreed. They lured Daniel into a confrontation, bound him, and killed him. But the partnership did not last. After Daniel's murder, Richard began to fear Emily would betray him. She had started asking questions about his plans, and she had grown nervous about the police investigation. Witnesses would later recall seeing them arguing at the Luttle on the night of Daniel's disappearance. Richard decided to eliminate the risk entirely. He convinced Emily to travel with him to the farmhouse, telling her it was a safe place to hide. Once there, he killed her, and attempted to erase all traces of her presence. The evidence against Richard was overwhelming. DNA linked him to both crime scenes, surveillance footage placed him with Emily after Daniel's death, and the hardware store receipts tied him to the purchase of the murder materials. Under questioning, Richard initially denied killing Emily, claiming she had left the farmhouse alive. But when confronted with the physical evidence and the phone records showing he was in the area at the time of her death, his denials collapsed. In a final, calculated move to protect himself, Richard tried to frame Emily as the mastermind, claiming she had pressured him into killing Daniel and that he had acted out of love and desperation. He insisted that Emily's death was a tragic accident during an argument. The jury saw through his shifting stories. Prosecutors presented the case as a sequence of cold, deliberate acts, first to secure money, then to silence a partner in crime. The trial was swift. The community, still reeling from the loss of the Harpers, filled the courtroom each day. Grace sat quietly through the proceedings, her expression unreadable as the details of her parents' final days were laid bare. In the end, Richard was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Grace, the verdict brought no real comfort. The family she had known, the laughter-filled home, the warm evenings on the porch was gone, replaced by a legacy of betrayal and violence. Neighbors who once admired the Harpers now spoke of them in hushed tones, their story serving as a grim reminder that appearances can be dangerously deceiving. The house at the end of the street remained empty, its windows dark, the porch swaying in the wind. Over time, the flowers in the garden withered, and the white paint began to peel. The perfect life the Harpers had once shown to the world had been shattered, and the quiet neighborhood would never forget the chilling murder that broke a happy family.